The bell above the door of Hollow Bean Cafe gave a tired little jingle every time someone walked in, and Daniel Cole had learned to listen for it the way other men listened for their own names. 6 years of running this narrow, brick-walled coffee shop on the corner of 9th, and Larch had taught him that the bell told you everything before the customer did. The hesitant jingle of someone lost, the sharp jingle of someone late, the soft, apologetic jingle of someone who couldn't really afford to be there but needed the warmth anyway. Today, it was raining, and the bell rang soft. Daniel didn't look up right away. He was wiping down table 6, the one by the window, the one his daughter Lily used to call the reading table, because it caught the most light. She was 10 now. Some mornings he still set a napkin down there out of habit before catching himself. He'd lost his wife, Rachel, 3 years ago. Not to anything dramatic. An aneurysm, sudden and silent, on an ordinary Tuesday. Since then, Daniel had built his life around 2 things: the shop that barely broke even, and the daughter who was the only reason he got out of bed some mornings. He finally looked up when he realized the soft jingle customer hadn't ordered anything, just stood there, dripping, in a coat that cost more than Daniel made in a month, staring at the chalkboard menu like it was written in a language she used to know but had forgotten. "Table for one?" Daniel asked, because it was easier than asking, "Are you okay?" The woman, mid-30s, sharp cheekbones, exhaustion sitting under her eyes like bruises she'd tried and failed to cover, gave a short, humorless laugh. "Table for one," she repeated. "That's exactly what I have every day of my life, Mr. Cole, Daniel Cole." "Table for one," she said again, softer this time, like it hurt. Then she sat down at table 6, Lily's table, without ordering, and put her face in her hands. Daniel almost turned away. It wasn't his business. He had flour on his hands and a batch of scones going in 9 minutes and a daughter to pick up from school in 4 hours. And the world was full of exhausted strangers who didn't need a barista's pity. But something in the way her shoulders had folded stopped him. He set a cup of chamomile tea in front of her. The one thing on the menu that was technically free, because his wife used to say nobody should cry alone over an empty table. "On the house," he said. "Tea's better than nothing when the world's being unkind." She looked up at him, really looked, the way people rarely did with the man who made their coffee. And something in her face cracked open, just slightly. "You have no idea," she said, "how unkind it's been." Her name, though Daniel didn't know it yet, was Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Housing Group, a woman Forbes had once called the coldest boardroom in the city. In an article she still, secretly, kept folded in her desk drawer. Mother of 4 7-year-old girls. A widow herself in every way that mattered, though her husband was still, technically, alive somewhere. He'd left when the girls were 2, unable to compete with a company that never slept. She hadn't come to Hollow Bean Cafe for coffee. She'd come because her driver had a flat tire 4 blocks from her office, and she'd needed somewhere to sit that wasn't a boardroom, wasn't a hospital, where her father, the company's founder and chairman, had just been readmitted for his heart, and wasn't the enormous, echoing house where 4 little girls were currently being watched by a nanny who was clearly, quietly, planning to quit. She drank the tea. She didn't say thank you. She left a $100 bill under the saucer and walked back out into the rain before Daniel could tell her it was too much. He didn't chase her down. He just stood there, watching the door swing shut, the bell giving one last confused jingle, and thought, "Some people carry storms you can't see from the outside." He had no idea that storm was about to walk straight into his and Lily's small, careful life, in the shape of 4 7-year-old girls with a plan. It happened again 4 days later, and then again the following week. Victoria Sterling, it turned out, had developed a habit, an inconvenient, illogical habit, that she couldn't fully explain to herself, of stopping at Hollow Bean Café on her way between the office and the hospital, where her father lay recovering from a bypass surgery that had gone medically fine and emotionally nowhere near fine at all. She never ordered much, sometimes just the tea. Once, on the worst day, the day the board had quietly floated the idea of interim leadership while her father recovered, a phrase that made her stomach drop because she knew exactly what it meant. She knew exactly who was circling. She'd sat at table 6 for 40 minutes without saying a word, and Daniel had simply refilled her cup twice and left her alone. That, more than anything, was what kept her coming back. Not the tea. The fact that Daniel Cole never asked her to explain herself. "You don't seem like the type who does small talk," she said to him on her 6th visit. Not quite a question. "I run a coffee shop next to a hospital," Daniel said, wiping down the counter. "Half my regulars are people having the worst week of their lives. You learn pretty quick that most people don't want small talk. They want somewhere quiet to fall apart without an audience." Victoria studied him. There was something unpolished about Daniel Cole that she wasn't used to. No expensive watch, a flour-dusted apron, a gentleness in his voice that hadn't been trained out of him by 20 years of hostile takeovers and shareholder calls. He looked, she thought, like a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone, which was the rarest thing she'd encountered in years. "What happened to you?" she asked. "You have that look. The look of someone who survived something." Daniel's hands stilled on the counter for just a second. "My wife died 3 years ago. I've got a 10-year-old daughter who's smarter than both of us combined and a coffee shop that loses money every winter and somehow scrapes by every spring. That's my whole storm." "That's not a small storm." "No," he agreed, "but it's mine. I know its shape. I know how to survive it. Yours looks like it doesn't have a shape yet. Like it's still growing." Victoria didn't answer that. She just stared into her tea for a long moment and then, unprompted, told him more than she'd told her own therapist in months, about her father's heart, about the board members who smelled weakness the way sharks smell blood in water, about 4 little girls at home who barely recognized her because she was always at the office, always in a meeting, always somewhere else, even when she was standing right in front of them. "They call the nanny Mom by accident sometimes," Victoria admitted, voice flat with the kind of pain that had gone numb from overuse. "I don't even blame them." Daniel didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her it would be fine. He just refilled her tea and said, "Kids don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to keep showing up in the same shape, so they know what to expect. That's it. That's the whole trick." It was such a simple thing to say. But Victoria Sterling, who had negotiated 11-figure acquisitions without blinking, found herself blinking hard, staring at the rain-streaked window, because no one had said anything that honest to her in years. She didn't know that day that her daughters had already noticed the change in her, that the youngest, Poppy, had asked the nanny where their mother went every afternoon, and that all 4 of them, Poppy, Ivy, Wren, and Hazel, had, in the secretive, absolute way that only 7-year-olds can manage, decided to find out for themselves. It was a Tuesday when the Quadruplets first walked into Hollow Bean Café, unaccompanied, technically, by any adult who knew where they actually were. Their nanny, Marisol, had brought them to the pediatrician 2 blocks over for a routine checkup, and while she stepped into the restroom to take an urgent call from Victoria's assistant, 4 identical raincoats slipped out the side door and, following a trail of half-remembered directions from a driver's offhand comment, "Ms. Sterling likes that little cafe on 9th, walked, hand in hand, in hand, in hand, into Hollow Bean. Daniel noticed them immediately. 4 small girls, dripping, unmistakably matching in coats but distinct in expression. One cautious, one bold, one watchful, one already climbing onto a stool before anyone stopped her. "Whoa, hey," Daniel said, coming around the counter fast. "Are you 4 here with someone?" "We're looking for our mom," said the boldest one, Ivy, though Daniel didn't know names yet. "She comes here. She smells like this place when she gets home, like coffee and cinnamon." Daniel's stomach dropped in the particular way it does when you realize 4 unaccompanied children have wandered in off a busy street. Okay. Okay. Nobody panic. I mean, I'm not panicking. Do you know your mom's name? "Victoria Sterling," said the smallest one, Poppy, with the solemn precision of a child reciting something she'd practiced. "She's a CEO. That means she's very important and very busy and doesn't have time for tea parties." Something in Daniel's chest twisted at the flat, rehearsed way she said it, like she'd made peace with a sentence that no 7-year-old should have to make peace with. He got Lily, who was doing homework in the back booth, to keep an eye on them, made 3 phone calls in 4 minutes. To the pediatrician's office, who confirmed a frantic nanny was searching 2 blocks away, and then, at the pediatrician's suggestion, directly to Sterling Housing Group's front desk, who patched him straight through to Victoria. "They what?" Victoria said, and Daniel heard, for the first time, real fear crack through her composure. "I'm coming. I'm 3 minutes away. Don't let them leave. Don't let anyone—" She stopped herself. "Thank you. I'm coming." She arrived in under 3 minutes, coat half-buttoned, heels loud against the wet pavement, and swept into the café with the kind of controlled panic that only parents recognize in each other. She dropped to her knees in front of her daughters, right there on the coffee shop floor, checking each of their faces like she was counting something precious that might have gone missing a piece at a time. "We just wanted to see where you go," Wren said quietly. "We wanted to see the coffee and cinnamon place." Victoria didn't scold them. She just held all 4 of them at once, arms not quite long enough, and Daniel watched a woman who ran a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars come completely undone over 4 small, damp raincoats. It was Poppy, always the observer, who looked past her mother's shoulder at Daniel, who was crouched nearby making sure Lily wasn't overwhelmed by the sudden chaos, and asked the question that would upend everything. "Is that man your friend?" Victoria, still holding her daughters, looked up at Daniel, flour on his apron, worry still creasing his forehead, a man who had dropped everything in his own small, struggling life to make 4 calls and keep 4 strange children safe without being asked. "Yes," she said, surprising herself. "I think he might be." What began as gratitude became, over the following weeks, something neither Daniel nor Victoria quite had a name for. Victoria started bringing the girls to the cafe on Saturdays, real visits now, planned ones, not accidental wanderings. Lily, who had spent 3 quiet years as an only child in a house that echoed a little too much, found herself suddenly surrounded by 4 girls who fought over crayons and argued about cinnamon rolls, and, within a month, had started calling her Big Sister, with a casualness that made Daniel's throat tight every time he heard it. The girls, for their part, had taken to Daniel with the wholehearted, unguarded devotion that children give to safe adults. He remembered their names within a week, a small thing, but it undid Victoria a little, because the last 3 nannies hadn't managed that in months. He knew Hazel liked her hot chocolate with exactly 2 marshmallows, not 1, not 3. He knew Wren needed the quiet corner table because loud rooms made her chew her sleeves. He knew Ivy needed to be first at everything or she'd sulk for an hour, and that the trick was to let her help pour the milk so she felt important. Poppy, the quietest, the most watchful, was the one who started the Whisper campaign. It began on a Saturday in late autumn when the board, Victoria's board, led by her father's oldest rival and business partner, a sharp, silver-haired man named Harold Whitfield, had scheduled an emergency vote on interim leadership while her father remained in recovery. Whitfield had, for years, wanted Sterling Housing Group's more sentimental divisions cut, including a below-market housing initiative Victoria's mother had started decades ago. The one thing left of her that Victoria refused to let die. Whitfield's argument, delivered smoothly at every board meeting, was always the same. Victoria Sterling has no stability at home. A company like this needs a leader whose life isn't in chaos. It wasn't entirely fair, but it wasn't entirely wrong either. Victoria was a single mother of 4. Her father was in the hospital. Her ex-husband hadn't called his own daughters in 8 months, and the board had begun, quietly, to whisper that perhaps Whitfield, married, stable, ruthlessly competent, should step in temporarily. Poppy overheard her mother crying about it on the phone one night, thought about it with the terrifying clarity that children sometimes have, and marched into her sister's shared room with a plan. "If Mom had a husband," Poppy said, "the board couldn't say she's unstable. Daniel makes her happy. Daniel makes us happy. We just need him to pretend." "Pretend to be married?" Wren asked, scandalized. "Pretend to be our dad," Poppy corrected, "just for the important dinner. Just so the mean man with the silver hair stops saying mean things about Mom." It was, by any adult measure, an impossible plan, built on the beautiful, reckless logic of 7-year-olds who believed the world's problems could be solved if the right 2 grown-ups would just admit they liked each other. The following Saturday, at the café, all 4 girls cornered Daniel by the pastry case, while Victoria was on a phone call outside, and Poppy, solemn, small, utterly serious, took his hand and whispered the sentence that would change all their lives. "Pretend you're our father. Just for one dinner. Please. It would fix everything." Daniel felt the floor tilt slightly beneath him. Behind the girls, through the rain-streaked window, he could see Victoria pacing on the sidewalk, one hand pressed to her forehead, fighting a battle these 4 small girls didn't fully understand, but had, in their own way, decided to help her win. He should have said no. It was a terrible idea. It was dishonest. It was complicated. It risked everything fragile and good that had grown between their 2 small, broken families. He knelt down instead, so he was eye level with Poppy. "Let me talk to your mom first," he said. "Grown-up things need grown-up honesty, even when they start with a kid's good idea." Victoria's reaction when Daniel told her what the girls had asked was not what he expected. She didn't laugh it off. She didn't apologize on their behalf. She sat very still at table 6, their table by now, and stared at her hands for a long moment before she spoke. "Do you know why I keep coming back here?" she asked. "It's not the tea. God knows it's not the tea. It's that for the first time since my husband left, I have somewhere I don't have to perform. I don't have to be the CEO or the daughter of a sick man, or the mother who's failing 4 little girls no matter how hard she tries. I just get to be tired. And someone still gives me the good chair." Daniel didn't say anything. He let her keep going. "The board vote is in 9 days, she continued. "Whitfield's going to use my personal instability," his words, "to justify pushing my father out of active leadership permanently and installing himself as CEO in all but title. My father built that below-market housing program for people exactly like the family I grew up in. Whitfield's wanted to gut it for 15 years. If he wins this vote, it's gone within a quarter. And the girls think if I show up to one dinner pretending to be—" "I know it's absurd," Victoria said quickly. "I'm not asking you to. I would never ask you to lie for me, Daniel. That's not—" She stopped, frustrated with herself. "That's not what this is." "What is it then?" Victoria looked at him, really looked the way she had that very first rainy day. And something in her voice went quiet and unguarded. in a way Daniel hadn't heard before. I don't want you at that dinner because it would fix the board vote. I want you at that dinner because when I imagine walking into that room, the only version of the evening that doesn't feel unbearable is the one where you're standing next to me. And I don't know what to do with that, because I have spent 4 years building a life where I don't need anyone standing next to me for anything. The rain had started again outside, tapping softly against the window of table 6. Daniel thought about Rachel, about the years of grief that had taught him exactly how heavy a table for one could be, and about a woman who had walked into his shop as a stranger and slowly, without either of them quite choosing it, become someone whose weight he wanted to help carry. I won't pretend to be anyone I'm not, Daniel said carefully, but I'll go to that dinner as exactly what I am. A man who cares about you and your daughters, and isn't ashamed to stand next to you and say so in front of anyone, including Harold Whitfield. Victoria's breath caught. That's not pretending at all. No, Daniel agreed. It's not. That's the whole point. Your daughters asked me to pretend because they're 7, and pretending is the only tool they had. But I think what they actually wanted was for someone to finally tell the truth out loud, in a room full of people who've spent years underestimating you. For the first time since he'd met her, Victoria Sterling smiled. Not the practiced boardroom smile, but something younger, something that belonged to the woman she might have been if her life had gone differently. Then come to dinner, she said, not as a pretend husband. As exactly what you just said. Let's see if Harold Whitfield knows what to do with the truth. The dinner was held at Sterling Manor, the sprawling family estate Victoria's father had built 40 years earlier, and Harold Whitfield arrived early, the way predators always do, so he could survey the room before the prey. He found Daniel in the front hall, helping Poppy fix a crooked hair ribbon, and something in his expression flickered with immediate, practiced condescension. And you are? Daniel Cole. I run a coffee shop on 9th Street. How quaint, Whitfield said, in the tone of a man who considered quaint an insult. And your relationship to Miss Sterling? He's our friend, Wren said fiercely, before Daniel could answer, planting herself between the two men with the particular ferocity only a 7-year-old defending someone she loves can manage. A real friend, not like you. Whitfield's smile thinned, but he said nothing more before the other board members began arriving and dinner was called. It went sideways almost immediately. Whitfield, seated across from Victoria, waited only until the second course to make his move, a smooth, rehearsed speech about stability, about optics, about how a company facing its founder's health crisis needed leadership that projected calm, controlled strength, not a household of chaos that 4 unsupervised children wandering the city streets had recently, publicly, demonstrated. With respect, Victoria, Whitfield said, his voice syrup-smooth, the board isn't questioning your competence. We're questioning whether a woman managing a household in visible disarray, alongside a father in critical health, can also steer a company through this transition without something, or someone, falling through the cracks. The table went quiet. Victoria's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Daniel saw the old fear flicker across her face. The fear of a woman who had spent years being told in 100 polite corporate ways that she was one bad week away from being replaced by someone calmer, someone married, someone who looked more like Harold Whitfield. Daniel set down his fork. I'd like to say something, if that's all right, he said. And the table's attention swiveled toward him, a stranger, an outsider, a man in a jacket that didn't match anyone else's in the room. I don't own a company, Daniel continued. I own a coffee shop that loses money every winter. I know what it looks like from the outside when someone's life seems like it's in disarray, because mine has looked that way plenty of times since I lost my wife. But I've learned something running that shop, watching hundreds of people walk through my door on their worst days. The people who are actually falling apart don't show up. They don't ask for help. They don't let four little girls walk 2 blocks in the rain to find them because those girls trust, all the way down to their bones, that their mother will drop everything and come running the second she knows they need her. He looked directly at Whitfield. Victoria Sterling didn't fall through any cracks. Her daughters walked straight to her because they know exactly who she is, even when she's not in the room. That's not chaos, Mr. Whitfield. That's the opposite of chaos. That's a foundation so solid that 4 7-year-olds could find their way home to it blindfolded. Poppy, sitting beside Daniel, reached over and took his hand under the table. Whitfield's composure slipped for just a fraction of a second, enough for the rest of the board to see it, before he recovered with a tight, dismissive laugh. Very touching. But sentiment doesn't run a housing conglomerate. No, Victoria said, finding her voice again, steady now, sharper than before. But it built one. My mother started the below-market housing initiative you've spent 15 years trying to kill, Harold, because sentiment told her that people deserved a roof even when the market didn't think they were profitable enough to deserve one. That program has kept 11,000 families housed over 2 decades. That's not chaos. That's legacy. And I think, after tonight, this board should ask itself which one of us actually understands what this company was built to do. The vote, when it came 9 days later, was not close. Whitfield's motion for interim leadership failed by a wide margin. Several board members later admitted, privately, that the dinner had shown them something they hadn't expected. Not a woman in disarray, but a woman surrounded by people, small and large, who trusted her completely. 6 months later, Hollow Bean Café had a new addition to its window, a small hand-painted sign that read, Table 6, reserved, most days, for the Sterling Cole family. Victoria's father recovered fully and returned to the company as chairman emeritus, spending most of his time, these days, visiting the below-market housing developments his late wife had started, often with 4 granddaughters in tow, who had appointed themselves, with great seriousness, his official site inspectors. Harold Whitfield resigned from the board 2 months after the vote, taking a position at a rival firm where, according to industry gossip, he complained often about companies run on sentiment instead of strategy. A sentence Victoria kept, framed, in her office as her favorite compliment. Daniel still ran the coffee shop, though it made a little more money now, mostly because Victoria had, without asking, quietly connected him with a local supplier through one of Sterling Housing Group's community partnerships. Not charity, she'd insisted, just good business between people who'd earned it. Lily, 12 now, had 3 sisters who weren't quite sisters yet, in any legal sense, but who called her that anyway, and who had staged, the previous spring, an entirely unauthorized practice wedding for Daniel and Victoria in the cafe's back room, complete with paper flowers and a ring made from a twist tie, 2 full months before Daniel actually worked up the courage to ask the real question. Victoria said yes, before he'd even finished asking. On the evening of their real wedding, small, held in the cafe itself, Table 6 pushed against the wall to make room for folding chairs. Poppy stood up during the toasts, 7 years old going on 40, and said the thing that everyone in the room had been circling for a year without quite naming. We asked Daniel to pretend to be our dad because we thought pretending was the only way to get what we wanted, she said, reading carefully from a napkin she'd covered in careful, 7-year-old handwriting. But it turns out you don't have to pretend anything if you just tell the truth about who already loves you. Daniel, holding Victoria's hand at the head of the table, felt his throat close the way it always did now around the girls, not with grief this time, but with something that had slowly, patiently replaced it. Because that was the real discovery, the one neither the board vote, nor the dinner, nor the frantic, rain-soaked reunion at the cafe had fully captured. That families weren't always built from beginnings that made sense on paper. Sometimes they were built from a table for one, a free cup of tea, and four small girls brave enough to walk into a stranger's shop and ask him to be exactly what he'd already, quietly, become.